Okay guys, let's go ahead and create a data source. We're going to see how to create a data source. Now the data source creation is a pretty simple step that we're going to follow. Now normally when you create a data source in let's say WebLogic, you would give something like this. So first thing you will give uh, the name of the data source, then GNDI, and the type of database. Now here, the reason why we give the type of data source is because the drivers are automatically installed, and once you give the type of the database, the driver list will be given: XCA, non-XCA, type 4 drivers, all that stuff. Now then so once the driver is what is selected, then we go into the next step and we give DB name, then we'll give the port number of the DB, then we'll give username, password to connect to the database, and other stuff. All right, then we will test the connection. That's what we do. Now this in JBoss also pretty much same, but only thing is the drivers are not automatically installed, which means we have to install the drivers manually. So that's your step one. So the step one, this is all WebLogic. Remember, this is WebLogic. If you're this is WebLogic. Whereas what we are talking now is JBoss. So JBoss, so we have to, first thing you do is to install JDBC drivers. That's what you do first. Once you've installed it, now you create the data source. Now creating the data source exactly follows the same pattern that we have done here. So you still select the driver, which driver you have to create, then you will give all these details, and then you test the connection. So creating the data source is same as this one. Alright, what is the additional step here is to install the drivers. Now the driver installation can be done in two ways here. One is as an application, other one is as a module. Means the jar file is where the drivers come as. So you can install the driver as application module, or so you can as an application, then or else as a module. Both ways it can be done. Alright, once the drivers are installed, then you can create a data source in a lot of ways. Again, you can create in a lot of ways. So let's say these things can be done in a lot of ways. So you can edit the standalone.xml file. That's one way of doing. Edit alone.xml. That's one thing. All right. The second thing you can do is you can use console. A third thing, obviously, we know everything that can be done from console can also be done using CLI. So one of these three methods you can employ to create the data source in the second step. The same way, one of the two methods, these are one of the three methods, and one of these two methods can be employed to finish the first step. So first step can be done in two ways. Second step can be done in three ways. Now what we are going to do at this point is we're going to deploy the JDBC driver as an application, This is what we're going to do. All right, and then we're going to create the data source using console. This is how we're going to do. The other ways of doing it means you can install the drivers as a module, then edit the standalone.xml. That we'll see later, but at this point we are looking at driver as an application, data source through console. That's what we're going to look at. Alright, so let's go ahead and create it. So first thing first, so let me open that image. So we're going to install the JDBC driver first. So this is what we're going to do first, and then we will create the data source as a second step. Alright, this is what we're going to do next. So let's go ahead. Let's install the JDBC driver. Now the installation of a driver is just like a deployment. Alright, we know how to deploy an application. Just now we did for encode_it.var. The same thing we're going to do for the jar file of JDBC. So now the JDBC drivers, they come in a jar file called JDBC6.jar file. Alright. So the JDBC6.jar is a jar file that has all the drivers. So what we have to do is we have to deploy this file just like encode_it.var. Now I'm going to if you see this one, this is home encode_it JBoss install files over JDBC. Now I'm going to copy this one into our deployment directory. So this is our deployments directory. I'm going to copy this file, copy JDBC6.jar to deployments. So here I'm going to copy. So copied, go in here. So JDBC6.jar is here. But remember one thing, we have disabled automatic deployment. Means the scanner will recognize that there is a jar file, but it will not deploy it. That's what it will show you in the log file. See this one. It found JDBC6.jar in the deployment directory. To trigger the deployment, create this file. So copy it, touch it. TOUCH, shift insert. Now that you have touched it, it should get deployed. Let's see if it gets deployed. Yes, it's happening now. Starting the deployment of JDBC6.jar, this was deployed. Now you can see it here with the new file which is deployed. So you got the marker file also. The same thing can be seen from the console under deployments. So we're going to manage deployments. Here we go. So you have deployed the drivers file. The jar file is deployed. So the drivers are now available. Now all that you have to do is create a data source. Now the data source creation, as we were talking, can be done in a lot of ways. So we are going to use using console, the easiest way. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to get into the console here, create a data source. The creation will be done always in profile. To get into profile, data source, under connected, you have data sources. Now JBoss comes with a default data source called example data source. Right? So that you can leave it or we can remove it. But let's not worry about this one. So now again, you have data sources and you have XA data sources. We know the difference between XA and non-XA. Non-XA does not support two-phase commit protocol. XA supports two-phase commit protocol. Those are fundamentals. They always remain same irrespective of what app server you are using. They are Java. They are not even application server. So here we have deployed the drivers. Now we are about to create a data source. So all that you have to do is get into data source, add a data source. Now obviously before we go on adding the data source, we should bring up our database so that we can test it properly. So I'm going to bring up our database. You will not have this database in your clone. So ask the coordinator facilitator about the database details if you're working in the environment. So I'm starting the database. Once it is up, we'll continue with the creation of the data source and then test it. So the database is up. I'll start the listener. lsnrctl start listener. This is not our job in real time. The DBA will actually do all these things. But because we are here, we're doing everything. You don't have to do this one. This will be done by the facilitator. So now the database is up. You can see database and code DB. So this is all related to database. These are all various process related. There are a lot of process. See, all these processes are database related process. So now the database is up. Now let's go ahead and create a data source. Let's call the data source something that we want. Let's say Oracle data source, because this is Oracle database. Now the JNDI names in JBoss are slightly different than WebLogic. In WebLogic, you can give any JNDI name, whereas in JBoss, it's mandatory that all JNDI names start with JBoss : / I think that's what it is. Just give me a moment. It should start with Java : JBoss, sorry. Or it should start with Java : Java : This is how all the data sources should be. Now what I'm giving is Java : JBoss / my data source name, Oracle DS. That's the JNDI name. So here the compulsion is that it should always start with Java : It's mandatory. Alright, so let's go ahead and give that details. On to next. Now we know that we have to select a driver, and JBoss automatically detected these two drivers. If you see, this is Oracle JDBC drivers. This is 1.6. There is also another driver that comes by default. H2 is a database, alright, that comes by default with JBoss. So that driver for that H2 database is already installed. Here you can see it here. The one that we have just now installed is this one. So we will be selecting this driver. Now the connection URL. Now the connection URL in WebLogic is automatically created, whereas in JBoss you have to give it. So it's a little bit not as easy as WebLogic, or not as user friendly as WebLogic, but it's not that difficult either. So the connection URL is something that we know. You will see that this is the structure of the connection URL for JBoss. So you will see JDBC Oracle thin driver. This one, this JDBC Oracle thin, JDBC :oracle:/thin @IP port number database. Alright, so that's the syntax of the connection URL. Alright, so just make sure everything is correct here. Alright, once you're given, then this is a username password of the database. So here we are using SVO This username password will be supplied to you by your training facilitator. SVO So done. So you have created. Now an additional step, you can see actually here all the messages whether it is successfully done or not. Now that it's added, but it's, you see here is a tick mark here, whereas for this one there is no tick mark. So creating a data source is not going to be sufficient. You need to enable it. So you select it. After you select it, you enable it. Enable, click on confirm. Now it's enabled. So you can see actually that it's modified and enabled. You can actually see those things in your log files also. See this one here. This is where we deployed the application. Deploying JDBC compliant driver. This is the internal class that our driver is using. Oracle JDBC Oracle driver. Oracle JDBC. Alright, now after that is done, it's deployed. Alright, now we have just now created a data source which is also available here. Java : is mandatory. The JBoss is not mandatory, remember here. You can simply say Java : /Oracle DS also you can say. Java : is mandatory. Alright. So now that we have created a data source, now we just need to test it. So now select the data source, get into connection. You can test the connection. If everything is good, you should see a pop-up in a slightly one moment. It takes little time for the first time, right? Bingo. You have successfully created a JDBC connection. Now a data source in a WebLogic has an associated connection pool. That's something that we know. Alright, so what we have just now done was like this. Alright, so if we see, let me see this one. So a data source, so this is our WebLogic JBoss server, let's say. Alright, JBoss. Alright, now the data source is what we have created. So this is an application just like WebLogic. This is a JNDI. Then we have created a data source here. The name of the data source we have given is Oracle DS, and the JNDI for this guy is Java : JBoss /Oracle DS. This also we have given. So the driver is what we have created here. Alright, the driver is that OJDBC 6.jar file. Alright, OJDBC 6.jar. Alright, and on the back end we have the database, just like WebLogic, no difference at all. Alright, this is pretty straight stuff. Alright, everything's simple. Now just like WebLogic, in JBoss also you have a connection pool associated with it. a connection pool has objects called connection objects. This is exactly similar to WebLogic. So when you say connection pool, obviously there are certain properties associated with the connection pool. The pool size in WebLogic, if you observe, the WebLogic pool size is defined by parameters like initial capacity, min capacity, max capacity, like that. These are WebLogic. Alright, now when it comes to JBoss, you have minimum capacity and maximum capacity as they are. No difference. Let me give you the actual values. Okay, you can actually see those parameters here. So you have the following parameters for now: min pool size, max pool size, strict minimum, or else you'll say idle timeout, pre-fill enabled. These are the 4 parameters. We'll talk about what they are later. So we are basically looking at minimum pool size, what's the maximum connection pool size, what's the idle timeout after which the connection is considered to be closed. Then pre-fill enabled is something that we'll talk later. So for now, min pool size, max pool size are the 2 parameters that will control the pool size. Now obviously both these parameters can be changed and can be defined in the console or your standalone .xml file. So if you see it in the standalone .xml, let's first look at console. So if you look at console, you see this one, connection properties, the connection properties or attributes, sorry. Connection secure pool, see this one. Min pool size is one thing, max pool size is another thing, strict minimum, pre-fill enable, flush strategy, idle timeout, track statement. All these things are various parameters. Now those parameters are actually defined in standalone.xml file. So let me just show you that XML file. Let's just directly go to the standalone.xml file. So let's cd standalone configuration. If you see standalone.xml, search for Oracle DS, the one that we just now created. See this one, everything is getting updated here. So this is the data source we set. Alright, this is the data source we have created, the connection URL we have given. It automatically picked up the driver class from this jar file. The username password is also here. Ideally this password should be in the encrypted format. We will see how to encrypt the password later, but let's look at the connection pool related things. These pools are different. I'm not sure. There are certain parameters somewhere. Yeah, here we go. This is a pool. This is how you set it. Main pool size, max pool size, prefill, use strict minimum. This is a backend setting. The same thing can be actually done from the front end also by using this edit command. So when you click on edit, you'll be able to set everything. So let's say you want to set it 10, 10, strict minimum, enable, prefill, enable. What they are, we will see later. So it says the server reload is required. So basically we have to start the server. So let's go ahead and start the server. So in this case, psf grab java -9 6913. Let's start it again. Start standalone.sh. Right. So you have created a data source. Now if you refresh this page, reload it. Right. Now you have this data source which is enabled, and if you go to pool, you can flash it actually, all these 10 connection objects. Pool flashed, reload, go pool, everything is 0. So you can actually flash the pool. Means all the connection objects will be removed. That's called flashing. Now flashing is available in WebLogic also. It's called resetting in WebLogic. You can actually go to your data source and reset the data source. Alright. So that's your JDBC data source creation. Now remember one thing, we have done it in one way. This can be done in a lot of ways. In another session we will see how to set up a data source as it is a module, and then how to set it up using standalone.xml file. Alright, so let's go ahead.